What's up, you guys? Sean Ross Sapp, managing editor, Fightful.com, FightfulWrestling.com, FightfulMMA.com. We are over here on the Pro Wrestling channel, but eventually our podcast, all that good stuff, are over at YouTube.com/FightfulMMA Boxing. We're hoping to get that shortened to Fightful MMA, but the YouTube gods aren't allowing it quite yet. Right now, I am joined by one James Lynch. James, how are you?
I'm doing well, Sean. Good to be here. Glad to talk. We got a lot to talk about. I mean, it's never a dull moment in the world of MMA, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, we got to talk about the fact that I didn't know until now that Vancouver barely gets snow. I had no idea.
Well, I didn't know Kentucky got snow. Fair enough. So, I think we're both in the dark a little bit.
We are also joined by Showdown Joe Ferraro. Joe, how's it going?
What's up, guys? How you doing?
We got lots to talk about. UFC Argentina was this weekend. Because of the NXT show, I only offered short thoughts on the main event. We've got Liddell versus Ortiz 3, which I will be watching in a car as I drive back from WWE Starrcade. We have UFC Beijing. James has spoken to a few of the fighters on that show as well. Joe, did you get a chance to watch this momentous, huge UFC Argentina show?
Massive. Absolutely massive. Had a huge house party. About 40 guests came over. And then I realized, no, that wasn't the show here.
Well, Danibio draws.
Well, apparently he does over there. Well, there were some empty seats there.
Yeah.
Right. There were some empty seats, to say the least.
They did 10,000. They did pretty good.
Which is good, right? But it's great to have their own local star, right? I think it's fantastic when countries have their local stars, because now as he progresses up the ranks and he's up there, he's getting much better. Remember, he was supposed to fight Kamaru Usman here. So he's already calling out the champ, forming the champ, and he's going to take that title in 2019. He's got a whole country behind them. They're going to get probably more attendance at the next show. So I think it's always fantastic when one country has at least one star and a big star, because, it's natural. We're all patriotic. We want to follow our own, right?
So as I looked through this show, man, there was nothing I was really interested in through most of this show. However, there is one name that I think has gone just completely under the radar for far too long. James, we're going to talk about him. Rachael Ostovich quietly has won 8 fights in a row in the UFC, has won 10 of his last 11. He beat Fabinski, who is not chopped liver. He won his first 3 fights in the UFC. Didn't finish people the way he was outside of the UFC, but still, he ran into his first loss in the company to Ostovich. Meanwhile, Ostovich isn't exactly the guy you expect the UFC to push. He is a 37-year-old, 5'6" welterweight. You're not going to see a lot of that, but he had a lot of trouble making weight in the past. But the move to welterweight doesn't seem to have given him any issues.
No, this was a good win for him. The 8-fight win streak, I mean, we can put a couple asterisks there on some of those wins, because he did miss weight for a couple of those fights. So, can't get too riled up about it, but this was a good win for him. My question, like you mentioned, the height and sort of the reach he has in that division, that's gonna cause him some problems when he fights, tall, lanky guys like a Carlos Condit or Neil Magny. But in the meantime, this is a big win for him. I don't know what they do with him. I think he just, put him against whoever, maybe put him against, prospects or whatever. But certainly this was a bit of a surprise, I think, for the UFC to see him have so much success at 170.
Joe, Alexandre Pantoja defeated Ulka Sasaki. Flyweight fight. Is Sasaki out the door?
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, especially because it was such an early finish. I thought that fight would potentially even go the distance, but the fact it ended so quickly in the first round, 2 minutes and 18 seconds. Yeah, I think he's done with the UFC, at least.
Joe, I want your thoughts on the Cynthia Calvillo weigh-in. She came in and beat Botelho pretty quick, or not pretty quickly, just under 1 round, but looked very good in doing so. Did not look good on the scale. She says it's just because she didn't want to give the crowd a free show. I don't think so. That was a little bit scary to watch unfold, Joe.
Yeah, it's a little disturbing. Obviously, she can't make that weight anymore. She was 3 pounds over. She all had to do is lose another 2.5 pounds, and she wasn't able to do that. Now that could be a variety of issues, but when it's a pattern, just going to have to move up to 125.
James, what were your thoughts when you saw this? I mean, this is a woman who you talked to with pretty fair regularity, and maybe no indication that it was this rough. 3 pounds, that's a pretty big miss.
It is. If you saw the comments she made right after the weigh-ins, or her coach did with Jim, I forget who it was. They released a statement. I want to say it was Jim Edwards from MMA Knit that spoke to her team after. She worked with Lockhart and Leith heading into the fight. She was on her period apparently, so I don't know how much that impacted her weight cut in terms of her missing. But yeah, it was concerning. That was one of the worst weight cuts I've seen in a very long time. I mean, she barely made the scale. Her face was grimacing. It was not a good look overall. If we're going to chalk it up to, she was on her period. I'm not an expert on that stuff, but clearly, it's one of those things where, I think that this is the only time she's had like a bad cut like this. There's a lot of travel involved. I'll kind of give her a mulligan on this one, but in general, very concerning as far as her, trying to make that weight going forward. We'll see how she looks on the next one.
The consistently inconsistent Marlon Vera picked up a win over Guido Canetti. He's the type of guy you'll see win a fight, lose a fight, win 3, lose 2. That's just where we are. But Ian Heinisch was a guy that a lot of people didn't expect to win coming into his fight against Cesar Ferreira, and with good reason. Ferreira is a pretty established guy in that UFC middleweight division, but you spoke to Heinisch ahead of this fight, James.
I did. Yeah. I mean, I don't think a lot of people realize, unless you saw the interview here on Fightful, that Heinisch was supposed to fight on the Denver card. So people saying that this was a short notice thing and that he wouldn't be ready, that's just false. I mean, he was basically getting ready for a fight the week before. He took advantage of this opportunity. I thought if Heinisch was going to win this fight, it would be an early knockout, but he ended up just, having a better game plan, outstriking Ferreira. Heinisch looks great. And of course, it was great to see the big push that he's had, with his backstory, going and serving some time in jail, being on Rikers Island. I mean, it's pretty crazy if you look at the backstory there, but couldn't be happier to see Ian getting the win column here. These LFA middleweight champions that get promoted to the UFC do quite well in their debuts, and Heinisch is just another one to add to that list.
All right, James. Johnny Walker, the floor is yours, clown.
He definitely made a splash in his debut. I mean, Khalil Roundtree was clearly on the rocks in this fight. And, Roundtree's fault was that he played him straight up. And you can't do that against Johnny Walker. I mean, I myself have been on the floor many times from Johnny Walker. It's one of those things. I mean, this is a guy that really made a splash in his debut. I know I already said that, repeating puns here, but he really did. He looked great in this fight. Really athletic, a very tall guy for the division. We didn't know a lot about this guy heading into the matchup because, again, Contender Series Brazil was like one of these FBI, CIA operations where no one could watch it. We didn't know the results. It was kind of just put under wraps. I have no idea why. That was a dumb move in my opinion. But, great win over Roundtree, who had never been finished by strikes in his career. This is a guy the UFC should build on in a division that doesn't really have a lot of prospects in terms of, up and coming talent. So this is a great win for him. And I hope the UFC continues or takes advantage of the momentum that Walker had on the night there. And lots to celebrate.
I'm always a fan of these up-and-coming light heavyweights, even from Cutelaba to Dom Reyes, which if you're an up-and-coming light heavyweight, you're pretty much a top 10 now. That's just where we're at. And Johnny Walker, I think, is one that people should look out for. Joe, James mentioned the body size, like the frame that he's got. That could be a great thing. I mean, we've seen Kendall Grove kind of have a similar frame as compared to the weight divisions that he's been in. But in this light heavyweight division, it's not that deep.
No, and, I'll be honest with you. I think the guy's a weirdo. I feel like just basically on that post-fight interview, some of the stuff, I'm like, dude, this is the first time you've ever watched, you ever been to the UFC? I know, I get that, but there's a certain protocol, but man, he's got skills. I mean, to do that to Khalil Roundtree is something else, man. That's something special. That's a lot of power that this guy can generate. Those elbows from the clinch were pretty brutal. So pretty impressed with this guy. I just hope he kind of cleans up his post-fight antics, if you know what I'm saying.
Who could we see him against next, James?
That's a good question. I would think, he sort of defeated I don't know what you call Roundtree. Is he a veteran at this point? I mean, he's had a couple fights. He's getting, he's not young. That's sort of a tough one. I would say just maybe the same type of opponent at this point. I don't think you give him, someone like, I don't know. I'm trying to even think. The light heavyweight division right now is so wide open. I don't know. Maybe would you give him a Shogun at this point? I mean,
no.
Shogun really at this point hasn't shown a lot. I think, when you have guys like Shogun or, Little Nog is another good example of guys that, are veterans, but they really haven't made much noise in that division. I think those are the type of matchups the UFC should make going forward, because really, I mean, if you're a veteran, you need to sort of do that passing of the guard, I think. So I think that's probably what's next, a veteran type matchup like that.
Yeah, I could also see them putting him against like somebody like Pragno or Stasic, maybe putting him on one of those European cards or something to fill it out. And if he gets a win over there, good. You just never know. Ricardo Lamas defeated Darren Elkins. This is an impressive win because Darren Elkins is still a legit guy. Even though he's lost 2 in a row for the first time in his career, Joe, Ricardo Lamas looked very good. And at 36 years old, he needed a win like this. He needed a finish over a legit guy like Darren Elkins after he lost to Josh Emmett and Mirsad Bektik back-to-back. Dare I say this might be his best win? Gosh, if depending on how you feel about the Oliveira fight, because Oliveira missed weight monumentally, I'm looking at this and I'm like, gosh, this might be his best win in, I don't know, 4 years since Bermudez, since he finished Bermudez.
Yeah, well, listen, there was a work-like performance by him, right? Like, it was very systematic, very skilled. At times showed patience. At times, obviously, showed explosive power. I think it was a fantastic job by Ricardo. I mean, you fight a guy like Darren Elkins. Darren is always in the fight, no matter what. You have to believe that he's always in the fight. The guy just looks like a zombie. 1 minute into the fight, and it just gets worse and uglier and worse and uglier as the fight goes on. So, kudos to Ricardo for continuing to put the pressure on, but not being silly enough. Because if you look, even I think a minute before the fight ended, Darren was still throwing bombs, right? Like, it wasn't technical, it wasn't precise, but he was still throwing, strikes to finish. So, good for Lamas. I mean, that's got to be all fights are tough, but fighting a guy like that just won't go away, will not go away, has shown the propensity to come back like he does. I mean, kudos to Ricardo for that. It's one of those things where he needed that win. We know that. At the very least, to remain relevant. I mean, he's at number 11 on the rankings still. I know they haven't been. Oh, they were updated this week, weren't they? Yeah, they were updated yesterday. Yes. So he's still number 11. Remember, this is a guy that was way up there before. So it's a good victory for him, and happy for him. But I still got lots of love for Darren Elkins, man. I shouldn't say I'd love to see him fight more often, but I think enough's enough for this guy. To be honest with you, I mean, he's got lots left in the tank potentially, but man, it's just that's a lot of trauma the human brain is taking there.
Joe mentioned the number 11 spot for Ricardo Lamas. That's up 2 spots. What do you think about that placement in this division, James?
I think it makes sense in the sense that, Elkins is a guy that, has some notable wins like the Bektik win. And, he had a bit of a winning streak going there for a little bit. So I don't mind it as far as where his placement is. I mean, Lamas, this was to finish Darren Elkins was a very good win, in my opinion. And I think, is he that gatekeeper in that division? Potentially. I mean, we'll see. This was certainly a step in the right direction. And he's got some gas left in the tank. I know he's getting up there in age. I know he's promoting his gym. I love that, by the way, after the fight. I felt like I was watching an infomercial, but good for him. You got to get the spotlight when you need it. But yeah, no, I think at this point he's probably the gatekeeper in that division. If you beat him, you're probably going on to better things. If you can't beat him, you're probably not in that conversation.
Main event time: Neil Magny, Santiago Ponzinibbio. Santiago Ponzinibbio just dominated. I mean, Magny, it's hard for me to ever say, oh, he's out of the fight until the referee stops the fight. But man, it's been a long time, and the guy is still not checking leg kicks. And he got set up and then schlumped. He got set up with a beautiful leg kick after rounds of it, and then cracked in the face. And then he face planted for a sick KO. You have Ponzinibbio now, who is on a roll. We've got him at, I think, 7 straight wins. He's got wins over guys like Neil Magny, who have headline shows. Isn't a big name, but has headline shows. Mike Perry, Gunnar Nelson. That is a nice resume to be building as you're working to become a main event talent. And this was in Argentina. This was a guy that they banked on helping sell out the place. It's his second performance of the night in his last 3 fights. James, what did you think of his performance? He looked incredible.
This is a statement win for Ponzinibbio. You know, Magny is a very tough guy to finish. Usually gets submitted, right? So to see him actually get a finish in this one, a TKO, very impressive. You know, Magny has some pretty notable wins in that division as well. So that was definitely a big win for him. I think the thing with Ponzinibbio is, you know, he's got this winning streak. He just hasn't fought sort of the top guys in terms of a level of opponents. The Magny win's nice, but I think, you know, he's calling out Woodley. I think he needs a few more notable wins there. I'm upset that we didn't get to see that fight with him and Kamaru Usman. And I think if Usman beats RDA, I think Ponzinibbio is probably, you know, still behind Usman at this point in terms of the quality of wins. But nonetheless, you know, it's good to be in the Santiago Ponzinibbio business. This guy keeps winning. He keeps getting better. I think this was probably his best performance we've seen to date. And I think if you're the UFC, you've got a lot of options. One fight that I, you know, wouldn't mind seeing as far as a top 5 fight. What about him and Wonderboy? What's Wonderboy doing right now? He's, you know,
going to say that.
Yeah, he's you know, he's not fighting Robbie Lawler. Askren got that fight, so I think that is a fight that would make some sense because at this point, Wonderboy, he's kind of in limbo, losing to the champ twice, so he needs to have fights like this against you know, up and coming talent.
Joe, your thoughts on Ponzinibbio's performance?
Yeah, well, the performance was fantastic. You know, it was he did what he had to do. I think you know, I don't know that he's underrated or underappreciated by the hardcore fans. I mean, the mainstream fans probably don't know who he really is, but he's got skills, always had that. I mean, he was the guy that silenced that whole Mike Perry train. Like he derailed that Mike Perry train, right? So here's a guy that, in my opinion, that, you know, I'm looking at the rankings. I thought to myself, Stephen Thompson could be one guy that he competes against. Damian Maia doesn't have an opponent either. Right. So, you know, there's a way to build a name. And believe you me, guys, I don't know what either one of James, you may because you worked over at Sportsnet. But no, Sean, you know your soccer.
A little bit. I'm trying.
They're the biggest hatred / rivalry in all of sports. You can talk about Red Sox and Yankees and all you want, blah, blah. It is Argentina and Brazil. Okay, on the soccer level, it's ingrained in the culture. I mean, there was a few top 5 things that I've seen recently about life in general, and you know, Brazilians cannot stand losing to Argentinian players or teams, and vice versa. So with a situation like that, you got a Brazilian taking on an Argentinian. Put that in Brazil or put it in Argentina. Well, not going to happen in Argentina, but you put Ponzinibbio versus Damian Maia in Brazil. I think it'd be an absolutely fantastic situation for the UFC. Or crazy, whatever.
I think at this point, Neil Magny is what he is. If he's not checking leg kicks at this point at 31, when you're, oh gosh, 40 or 35 fights almost into your career, it's just not going to happen. But something I noticed, 4 fights in 2010, 3 in 2011, 5 in 2012, including tough, 3 in 13, 5 in 14, 5 in 15, 3 in 16, and he started to slow down. I think that pretty much since then, I think we're starting to see the cage miles really rack up on Neil Magny. I mean, my God, and this is in a short amount of time. I know that 8 years, 8.5 years doesn't seem like so long, but he's crammed 35 fights into that period. I mean, he's averaging almost 8 fights a year, James. That is a torrid pace to keep up.
Yeah. And I mean, as we all know, your body tends to break down, you know, the more mileage you get on there. You might be a certain age, but fighter age is completely different. You know, the example we always use is Jordan Mean, a guy who fought super early in his career. And, you know, I know now he's, you know, fighting less frequently, so that's helping. But I mean, certainly those miles do add up in terms of, you know, the amount of damage. And just think of all the training camps that have gone into those fights that you mentioned. I mean, it certainly adds up.
Maybe mileage.
Jane, Joe, what could be next for Magny?
That's a very good question. Depending on what the UFC sees him as right now, you know, he's going to need a fight that's going to make him stay relevant, or they put him against somebody that's an up and comer. I mean, I don't know if Dos Santos has a fight at the moment. You know, Cabo Oliveira is always an exciting fight, and that would be a fight that if I was Neil Magny, I'd rather take Oliveira. I'd rather be fighting someone that has a bigger name. That way, if I can get that win, I remain relevant. You know, Leon Edwards would be a pretty good fight as well, right? But at the moment for Neil Magny, it's tough pickings because he's competed for so long that MMA mileage is not good for the body, but he wants to continue fighting, and he wants to come back with he's got to get back on the horse, heal up, obviously, but he's got to get back on the horse and take on a name. For him, it's got to be, you know, in my opinion, someone in the top 15 Because if he's offered anything less, it's a sign to me from the UFC that it's like, dude, you know what? If you can't beat this guy, you're getting cut. Or not cut, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. It's broken record time on the Fightful MMA podcast. As I looked at my first quarter forecast, essentially, 11 UFC cards from January to March. And not just from January to March. There are none in the first 2 weeks of January. So from January 19th through March 30th, virtually 9 or 10 weeks, you have about 11 shows. It's a lot. A lot. As I look, I think it's every single weekend from January 19th through March 30th. And that's just what we have scheduled so far. We don't know what's going beyond that. That is up from 9 this year, 8 in previous years. Joe, we had speculated the ESPN Plus deal may lead to reduced schedules. I want to know your thoughts on this. And if not a reduced schedule, do we see reduced numbers of fights? Because, quite frankly, I don't think so at this point. Maybe.
I don't know that we speculated. We suggested.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's
that's a good point.
Yeah, sorry. It's just too many events. Case in point, this UFC Argentina event. I mean, a text I received in the early afternoon of Saturday was a simple request. Is it worth my time to watch this UFC show? Right? So people are like, that should not be a question. You know, is it worth my time to watch the Leafs game tonight? Is it worth my time to watch the Patriots play? Like, it should always be worth your time if you're a sports fan or anything in general. So I just think there's too many events. I think there's too many fighters on the roster. I think it's definitely a watered down product, taking nothing away from the fighters that aren't in the top 15. I still remain adamant it should be top 10, not top 15. You should earn your right. I mean, every fight, in my opinion, when you get to the UFC, should have some sort of relevance. Right now, I'm assuming Sean and James, with this new broadcast deal with ESPN, they've got it. UFC's got to provide content, and for the digital portion of it all, they got to provide content. So it doesn't look like it's these events are going to be being cut back anytime soon. In terms of fights, I like the thought there, Sean, of perhaps less fights. That could get interesting. Right now, does that mean so? If we go to less fights, what does that potentially mean? Is UFC Fight Pass no longer an option to put on events? Will it only be UFC Fight Pass followed by a main card only and no prelims, right? So there's a bunch of different things, no broadcast prelims. So a lot of different variables in there. I just think that, maybe because they're making so much money, because, there's a lot of untapped markets out there that want to hold UFC events. Who knows? But yeah, to me, it's just too many events, too many fighters on the roster.
James, I want to know what you think about this. We're covering virtually every one of these shows.
Yeah, we talk about it every week. I'm in favor of less shows or less fights or anything like that. I remember a time where you couldn't watch the prelims. It was just it was just the free cards on TV on Spike, and then it progressed to, hey, you could watch it on Facebook. But there's so much emphasis on starting the card at a certain time, watching all these fights. It's a big investment. I mean, there aren't a lot of sports. I know there's people that will watch Sunday night or Sunday football and they'll watch all day or whatever. That's fine. But I just think with MMA it's difficult because you're not. I don't want to throw any fighters under the bus, but you're not getting the with the NFL, you're getting the caliber of athlete that you would see. But in the UFC, there are guys, I've mentioned this many times, that get in the UFC on a short notice opportunity, and they probably don't deserve it. It's just they're a local guy. They need someone to fill a hole, and that's sort of what they go with. So we're seeing more and more of that. I'd like to see more quality than quantity, but like you said, with ESPN, they need content. Probably not going to happen. And we're also still going to get that brutal pacing as well with these shows because they have advertisers they have to pay. It's not a great experience for the fans, unfortunately. And it's funny. I watching this Argentina card, I actually PVR'd a lot of it and watched a bit of it later because I just have no patience these days for getting through commercials and filling in spots and everything like that. So I mean, the main card I watched, but a lot of it I sort of PVR'd and caught up later, and I'm fine with that. That's my choice.
I was able to get through the entire show in about an hour and a half. Roughly, because usually I got to watch from the start to the end. I got to live tweet through all of it. I got to do some articles and stuff. Well, the way that we constructed on Fightful, we write fight articles about basically top 15 fighters, anything momentous that happens, fighters reacting to big moments. There was none of that on this show up until like the main event fight. and I was covering NXT, so I got to watch it all behind, and I was like, man, this isn't so bad. Fights aren't that great. And then I realized I'm fast forwarding through everything. Yeah. I wonder if the Nevada State Athletic Commission wish they could fast forward through any involvement with Cody McKenzie at all, James. Cody McKenzie, who has been banned for 4 years, said that an athletic commission member took out his wiener and waved it at him, saying, look, it's not that hard to piss. Your reaction?
I mean, this is Cody McKenzie. This is the same guy who wanted to cut weight, so he went out and drank as much as he could because he'd be dehydrated. He also, donated some of his blood to get his weight down as well. So, nothing surprised me about Cody McKenzie. You could have the most outrageous story, outrageous headline, and it would not surprise me at all. This guy is... He is what he is. He's just a very unique character. And yeah, I mean, he's had a very weird path. And also, I mean, how many weight classes has he fought at? He fought in the UFC at 45. I think he fought Joe Riggs at middleweight. I mean, this guy is just all over the place. So any news pertaining to Cody McKenzie or, someone like felony Charles Bennett, it just doesn't surprise me anymore.
That's a fight that's going to happen eventually, right, Joe?
It has to, yeah.
Yeah. I can't believe James shared that. I know it's public knowledge, James. I get it. I was there. So that was the Battlegrounds show.
Oh, yeah?
Right. Yes, that's right.
That was the show I worked with Chael Sonnen and good old JR. I saw Cody drinking his face off the night before weigh-ins. A lot of wine. Drank a lot of wine.
Before you're going to fight Brock Larson, who I don't care how old he is. Come on.
Yeah.
Before you're fighting Brock Larson.
Yeah. And I was the morning he went to give blood. I saw him leave the air. He told us everything, right? This is how he does it. It's an easy way to do it. And I'm like, okay, but because the wine and the alcohol will dehydrate you. Right? Okay. So I can tell you this. He doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure it out. He does operate in a different frequency. But he's funny, man. He's just in person. He's fun, a little off kilter at times with his humor, but he's a pretty funny guy. But this whole Nevada State Athletic Commission, Sean, I was like, oh my God, Cody. Oh boy. Okay.
Speaking of off kilter, Nick Diaz allegedly returning next year. Here's the question I always ask. Will it really happen, James?
That's the big question. I mean, the fact that Brett Okamoto went out there and put the report out there tells me there must be a bit of fire where there is smoke. And I think that it's a matchup that kind of makes sense. I mean, it's not disrupting a title. It's not really disrupting any contenders. I mean, Masvidal's coming off a losing streak here as well. I think it could happen, but what kind of surprises me a little bit is just that it seemed like Diaz only wanted to come back for a big money fight. Masvidal isn't a big money name. It's a great matchup for the hardcore fans, and I'm certainly going to watch the hell out of it if it does come to fruition. But I think that they must be paying him some pretty good money otherwise, because I had sort of the notion that Diaz was only going to come back for a St. Pierre rematch, for a title shot, for all these things, because I think he knows his worth with the fan base. But either way, this is a fantastic matchup. There's going to be no chance of, takedowns on a Diaz brother. I mean, this is going to be a stand-up fight, and I think fans are going to get their money's worth. So I think, it's a great matchup. Does it actually happen? I mean, again, I never trust a Nick Diaz fight or a Nate Diaz fight happening until they actually step in the octagon, not because they're scared, but because of money and everything else that goes with it, the politics of it. So yeah, hopefully it does come to fruition for that March pay-per-view.
Joe, I often put a Nick Diaz in the same category as a Shane Carwin. Whenever I hear he's coming back, I don't believe it unless I see it. We're getting a little bit closer to this, but it is Nick Diaz. And as we saw with Nate, he's still not back yet. What do you think?
It goes back to our original conversations way back when we first started the show and the company. It's all about money. It's all about how much money you currently have and what you're doing with that money. If it starts running out, they're going to fight. They'll fight because they need to make income, and this is pretty much their main income. And again, there's sponsorships and other things that are potentially out there, but it only lasts for so long. And if you don't have, I can't see the Diaz brothers agreeing to a money manager or somebody to manage their cash or investments or any sort of stuff like that. I could be completely out to lunch with that statement. I don't know. But to me, when it comes to Nick Diaz and Nate Diaz, it's all about, where the money is, how much money's left in that bank account, and what they're about to do with it all. And whether or not, they need more money, time to fight.
In some unfortunate news, former Tough cast member Rachael Ostovich was attacked in an apparent domestic violence case in Hawaii. May have broken an orbital bone, James. This is terrible news. She was set to face Paige Van Zandt on the first ESPN Plus card.
Yeah, really unfortunate news. We have some more information this morning regarding that incident, which is that she's now officially off the card against Paige. So just really unfortunate situation. Allegedly, according to what we've read, it was a domestic violence case with her husband, Arnold Burdon, who is a fighter for Victory FC. I think he's fought for them. He's sort of a regional fighter. Just a really bad situation all around. And I feel for Rachael. I mean, we've interviewed her here on Fightful, just a total sweetheart. And, you never want to see this stuff in this sport because, people already need an excuse to hate MMA. And this just sort of adds to it just because, they are fighters. So people sort of look at this in a bad way, but it's just one of those unfortunate things that has happened. And the second case this year, we had Andrea Lee earlier this year. So, I wish her all the best and a speedy recovery.
Joe, anything on this?
Yeah, I wish her, the very best speedy recovery, only because, it's broken orbital bone or orbital bone damage. Like, come on, man, what is this thing coming to? But I definitely, I don't know the full ins and outs of the stories. And I've talked about domestic violence on the show before, not from my own experience, just in general from, what I've seen out there. I always want to get the full side of the story, only because I know some super tough women that have started situations and didn't end well for them, and in court, they lost. So it's one of those things where I learned that, let me just find out exactly what happened here. But you just can't put your hands on a woman, man. There's self-defense, like protect yourself, but don't touch her, man. Don't touch her. It's oh my God, it's just crazy. I just feel terrible about this whole story and really hope she gets better, because that was going to be a fantastic opportunity for her on ESPN, right? Like, that's major eyeballs for her. I feel terrible. It's I don't know, guys. Is it a career derailment or just a postponement? Like, it's a stumbling block. It's a barrier. I feel terrible for her.
You mentioned big opportunities that kind of fall by the wayside. Sean O'Malley's in that category as well. Pulled from what likely was the biggest MMA card of all time and what quite possibly could have been his breakout fight, because of 0.08 nanograms of ostarine. He got a 6-month provisional suspension because of this. And I would say the reason they probably do this is so it can get out of your system before you fight. But James, this is ridiculous.
Yeah, no, it is. I know they have sort of the new policy where you don't have to mention it, but he pretty much had to, because, why is he off this card? You couldn't just, if you lied, it would look even worse if it came out or whatever.
He essentially had to pull out of an interview with you.
Yes, he did. Yeah, I had an interview scheduled, and then he's like, "Sorry, man, I have to cancel," and I didn't get a reason. And I'm like, "What the heck?" Like, obviously, I didn't. We've had pretty good rapport even back to the LFA days. So, So I mean, that's unfortunate, and it just sucks because O'Malley had so much hype behind him, and he still does. He's one of the most popular fighters in the UFC, and to have something like this affect his career is just really unfortunate.
We've got and let's just not even talk about some of the things that these fighters may have done in the past, but Anderson Silva, Chris Cyborg, Josh Barnett, Yoel Romero, Junior Dos Santos, Sean O'Malley, off the top of my head. Yep. Even John Jones, to a degree, has had some questionable drug failures that USADA's been like, all right, okay, maybe not by intent, maybe it was contaminated, all this stuff. Mother of God, man. This seems like it happens every 6-7 weeks, does it not?
Yeah, it's like there's something, there's obviously something wrong with the system of how it's conducted and how it's all put together. It's just, I all for it. I'm all for drug testing. I'm all for a very clean sport. I'm all for the fact that, you should be competing clean and, but there's even arguments out there, you shouldn't be taking anything, like not even protein powder. Like, come on, that's a little crazy. Ridiculous. That's ridiculous. But I'm still for drug testing. It's just there's got to be some sort of fine tuning of the system to make sure it's proper, it's fair. Because I mean, just off the top of your head, like you mentioned, all those different names, that's crazy, man. It should not be that way. That should be an anomaly, like one every whatever. And it is. Well, technically speaking, if you actually do the math as to how many fighters are tested on a regular basis versus how many of these situations happen, it is a minuscule number. I just want it to be way more smaller than what it actually is.
Somebody in the live chat says, skinny fighter busted for substance. This is terrible. Blame USADA maybe. Skinny has nothing to do with it. There are all kinds of performance-enhancing drugs that do a lot of different things to you and for you. So that's not really a point for that anyway. But we got UFC Beijing coming up this weekend. James will offer up some thoughts this weekend. I'll be at Starrcade, so I won't be there for this show or Liddell Ortiz, which we will get into later. But James, I'll just say this. I don't expect you to give the blow-by-blow of this UFC Beijing card, because not only can I not pronounce half of these names, there's a very, very, very great chance that a significant portion of this card will never get UFC fights again.
You bring up a great point. I think the only intrigue for me on this fight, aside from the co-main event and the main event, there's a couple newcomers on this card. We've got Louis Smolka returning to the UFC, which is interesting, fighting at bantamweight. You've got Martin Day, who got signed to the UFC, teammate of Max Holloway. So I'm interested to see his debut there. He also fought in Contender Series. You got Vince Morales on this card at 135. Vince Morales is actually Ricky Simone's cousin.
Wow.
And he's fought a lot on the regional scene and really sort of carved his way on, and he's also a newcomer here as well. Alex Morono looking to bounce back. I'm sort of looking at the American fighters, on here as far as, some interest. Rashad Coulter fighting on this card. Now, he didn't think he was going to get another fight in the UFC. He gets one, and he's actually fighting at 205 pounds on this card, so that's interesting. Jessica Aguilar's on this card. Kind of forgot that she was, fighting on this card as well. And of course, the one I'm really excited for, Kevin Holland. After that interesting debut against Thiago Santos, he finally gets a full camp, and he's taking on John Phillips in what I think could be fight of the night. So those are sort of the only interesting things. But there's a lot of other fights on here that fighters that we've got a fighter on here that's got a 3-1 record. Didn't Dana say, like, if you want to be on Contender Series, you need at least, like, what is it, 5 fights or something like that? So it's kind of interesting. But
although his Bellator run has not been that great, you had Gerald Harris begging for a shot.
That's
he couldn't
right.
Get on Contender Series. Chris Curtis couldn't get signed off Contender Series.
Yeah,
like it's amazing the way this works. You spoke to Alex Morono, who's facing Keenan Song, who, boy, you want to talk about an odd trajectory to come into the UFC off of 2 straight losses and then win your first 2 fights in the UFC. You almost never see that. That's an interesting one. Syuri Kondo is one, if you're a pro wrestling fan, and I mean a real hardcore pro wrestling fan, that's one that you may know. She has a storied history in professional wrestling and CMLL. And, maybe I just didn't pay that much attention until Polyana Botelho knocked her out in 30 seconds. They didn't really have time to. Can't believe they didn't play that up, considering the pro wrestling connection there. And if she wins this fight, I would definitely do that. The crossover has never been more powerful. You have Jessica Aguilar, who finally got her first UFC win. I'm happy to see that. Li Jingyang, who, man, like 5 out of 6 he's won. So at least there's some quality there. Joe, before we talk about the main event and co-main event, is there anything on this prelim show that you're looking forward to?
Yeah, it's the only name, not the only name, it's the one I thought James was going to just hit a home run with is Li Jingyang. I love this guy. The way this guy fights. He's funny too. Like, he's just one of those guys. And he's powerful at 170 pounds. He hits like a truck and uses his jaw, like, just here, punch me here and watch what happens when I punch you back. I just think he's a fun fighter to watch. I don't know, guys, what his trajectory is going to be up the rankings, but eventually, the only thing is haven't all of his fights been overseas? Has he competed in Vegas at all? Let me just check here. Everything. Denver. He competed in Denver and he competed in Vegas. Okay. Philippines, Canada, Japan, China, Australia, Singapore. Right? Like, he's a guy that is that what they're doing? They're trying to, suck the name out of the leech here. Like, what's going on over here? I like this guy. I think he's fun. I think he's he can make some havoc here, but he's not fighting these guys potentially that are going to get him up the ranks. It's almost like he's got that filler sort of position whenever they go overseas or stuff like that, or just throw him around the world pretty much. But he has a victory with Frank Camacho, Zakatao. Lost to Jake Matthews, but listen, that went to the decision. So I'm looking forward to his fight for sure, guys.
I got 5 on it is in fact Syuri Kondo. I think she's a plus 320, and you just never know at that level of MMA. A fighter that hardly anybody that watches this show will know about is Sergey Pavlovich, but he is actually favored over Alistair Overeem, one of the greatest heavyweights of all time. There is one day we will get a Sergey Pavlovich versus Francis Ngannou fight, and I think they might have to build a bigger cage. I don't know if these guys are both Adonises, but Pavlovich comes in without a whole lot of fanfare in China. He's a guy that's 12, and I think it's 11-0 or 12-0, has some good wins, but he's facing an Alistair Overeem who can put anybody out with one shot, has a very underrated ground game too. James, what are you looking for out of this co-main event fight?
I mean, this looks to me like they're trying to build up Pavlovich here with the fact that he's fighting Overeem in the co-main event. You know, I haven't seen a ton of tape on this guy. I know that he did get a win over Baby Fedor, who fought last week for Bellator. So, I mean, that's a pretty good win in my opinion. But I mean, obviously the UFC, a much different animal in terms of quality of opponents. I think this is kind of one of those changing of the guards. I mean, if Overeem can get the win here, he'll be relevant. I mean, he takes out a top guy who's undefeated at 12-0. But Overeem needs to win. I mean, as much as Overeem is dangerous, he's been knocked out a bunch of times. I think he's actually the only heavyweight on the roster right now that has the most knockout losses in the UFC. So that's a bit concerning. Interesting tidbit, which if you guys had watched my interview with Curtis Blades, Overeem training with Blades, former opponent right now. So Overeem is in Denver. I like the fact that he's getting the elevation training. He's getting to train with Curtis Blades and Dontel Mays and some of the other bodies over there at Team Elevation or Elevation Fight Team. So that could help him here because he was at Jackson's before. I think maybe he was getting a little bit stagnant over there. So we'll see. Has he made the adjustments enough to take out a guy in Pavlovich? We'll see. But yeah, I think there might be some value here on Overeem as the underdog in this fight, just with the fact that, you know, he's got more experience clearly than Pavlovich, who's only got 12 fights.
Joe, Overeem, one of the most storied and sometimes frustrating fighters in MMA history. What do you think's going down here?
I got 5 on him. That's for sure.
Yeah, fair.
I just think that, you know, why not? He's a plus 100. It's even money, right? And, you know, what's the worst that's going to happen? I mean, Sergey's a bad man. He's 12-0, but, you know, I kind of on the same side as James that, you know, when he defeated Baby Fedor, but that was last year, right? Like that was November 19th, 2017, guys. Like that was, a year ago and at a day. So this guy hasn't competed in over a year. Ripped, fit, you know, Drago-looking dude that, you know, could give Alistair Overeem fits, but at the same time, this is Alistair Overeem, right? So I'm not there just yet, guys, and you guys can help me with this, but I'm not there just yet with Alexander Overeem sort of flip a coin. You never know which one's going to show up, or, you know, despite what happened with that Ngannou knockout, you know, Overeem still has what it takes. And I think if he's patient, could emerge victorious here, especially that James mentioned the elevation training. You know, he's just got to be smart, and he's a very experienced fighter. We know that. What's he got? 60 fights now? Like it's ridiculous. So I'll put 5 on Overeem in my opinion. Will I be surprised if Pavlovich wins? No, but looking at the odds, guys, I got 5 on Alistair.
Then it's main event time. Francis Ngannou, Curtis Blades. I love the idea of running this back. They look at this and they say, what's the worst that could happen? Ngannou, a guy that we pushed real hard, can win, or Curtis Blades can avenge one of his losses and get back on the right track. Personally, I have Curtis Blades taking this one after we have seen the blueprint on how to beat Francis Ngannou. Blades is a guy that you talk to a lot, James, and I always rave about this guy. He's so soft-spoken, and like, it's just if he had Derek Lewis's charisma, I think that it would just be like a different level. But he's a very soft-spoken, nice guy, but also very outspoken on social media. Doesn't hesitate to say, I would beat Brock Lesnar in short order. I think he's getting it done here, but I want to know what you think. You get to talk to him an awful lot.
Yeah, I like Blades in this matchup as well. And I think the big thing you have to look at is just the fact that when he fought Ngannou the first time, he wasn't training in Denver. So he wasn't getting the quality. He was basically training back home in Illinois. So he wasn't getting the type of training he is getting in Denver, where he has the elevation, where he has the, you know, really good training partners, good coaching, good strength and conditioning. So he's getting all that now. And we've seen that. I mean, you know, here's the thing. I mean, Ngannou could knock out anyone in the heavyweight division. That's true. He knocked out Curtis when they fought the first time. But Blades has really improved, his striking defense. I mean, Mark Hunt cracked him, and Blades was still able to persevere in that fight. And I think he could do the same thing here against Ngannou. The thing I like about Blades is that he's just very athletic, very mobile, really good wrestling. I mean, we've seen the improvements in his wrestling in that fight, and I think that's going to be the difference. I mean, as powerful as Ngannou is, he's not that mobile of a heavyweight as some of the other guys he's fought, and we saw that in the fight against Stipe Miocic, where Miocic was able to sort of, maneuver around him a little bit. And I think Blades is a little bit faster than him. I like Blades here. I think he probably wins the decision. Ngannou, very tough to finish. I think that he'll just play it smart. And there's a lot at stake here for Curtis, because realistically, he should have got the next title shot. He was at UFC 226 when, Stipe and Cormier fought. And I think the idea was, that he was going to fight Stipe for the belt, assuming Stipe won. That doesn't happen. Brock Lesnar crashes the party. So this is a guy who, I'm sure if there was any other fight, and actually he talked to me about this, I should mention this, that, I think the only fight he'd take outside of an Ngannou rematch was a fight with Stipe. He doesn't want to fight anyone else. He's not interested in Volkov. He's not interested in anyone else. And I don't blame him, because realistically, let's forget about the Milstead fight, because, it was I think a no contest because of marijuana metabolics. He's basically been undefeated since the Ngannou loss. I think he takes it here by decision.
Joe, your thoughts? I'm a big fan of Blades' work. I am a proponent and advocate of wrestling. I really love how he implements it. And for his body, he's deceptively big as well. You don't understand how big a Blades is, but man, people just can't get out from underneath him.
Yeah. I'm just trying to run this through my head in terms of which Ngannou's going to show up, right? Has it completely just changed? Based on the last two fights, right? Like, is that it? We seen him peak. We're done, right? So now it's a matter of, he completely underestimated Stipe Miocic, which is, borderline asinine. Then comes up against Derek Lewis with I don't know, like, what was that, right? Like, that was just crazy. So have you learned your lesson, right? That's the question. Have you learned your lesson and realized, hey, you know what? You better start taking this seriously, because you were on top of the world. You were pegged to be the baddest man on the planet at one point. Your life would have changed dramatically, although it has, considering where he's come from. Now you got a rematch versus Curtis Blades, who is one victory away from that title shot. I cannot see him not getting a title shot without defeating Francis Ngannou, unless, guys, it's an extremely boring fight. Can't really see it being a boring fight. I mean, anything can happen, but I can't see this one being a boring fight. I think Blades gets the finish here. I think he gets a finish here. I think he gets a TKO or a submission. And I don't know what's going to happen with Ngannou after this, but I mean, who knows, guys? Maybe Ngannou does show up and is that monster that we saw leading up to the Stipe Miocic fight and puts Blades away. I don't think it's going to happen. And at minus 225, it seems the public also believes that Curtis Blades, actually, let me just check that line here real quick, because I don't know how much it's moved. Oh, it's dropped. It was originally plus 115 for Curtis Blades. That sucker dropped to minus 225. So the public is really putting money on him. So
then we have the main event of the evening. And it's not on UFC Beijing. It's over on Fight TV. By the way, guys, hit up at Fightful Online on Twitter. We're doing a giveaway for a code right now where you can view that show for free. Chuck Liddell, Tito Ortiz 3. Now, I have to ask this, as I do often with fighters like this. James, does the fight happen? We are just a few days away from it. Does it happen come Saturday night?
Yep, it'll happen. And if Tito loses, there will be some sort of injury that prevented him from performing at his best.
Oh, yeah, he for sure will be like,
cracked skull. Actually, he's kind of used up a lot of them. And I don't mean to poke fun at him, but I mean, that is something that we hear a lot, in terms of his post-fight stuff. I love Tito. I think a lot of people give him too much grief. I mean, he's horrible in interviews, obviously some brain damage there, but I would just, it's true though. I mean, like he's been a running punchline. If people had watched the sport back when Tito first started and they knew what he did back in the day for this sport, there would not be nearly as much name calling or this and that on him. And I find like now people just that's the thing now. I see it every day on my timeline, people picking apart something, not so great that he says in an interview, but let's not forget what he did for the sport. But no, I just think the injuries, that's something that tends to be, highlighted a lot, win or loss with Tito.
He makes excuses when he wins.
Yeah.
It's just why I'm ready for the post-fight promo when he wins. It's saying, doctor says I need a back out of me, and they got to take my back out of me And I'm back, and Chuck got the best out of me. I'm ready for it. I know it's going to happen. I will say, as ridiculous as I thought Tito is, I got chills when he beat Bader and he did the Gravedigger. I got chills when I saw that, and I've never been a Tito guy. I've not looked at one Chuck Liddell open workout video because what's the point? If we're basing this on skill at this point, Tito Ortiz should run away with this. He's got some pretty good wins within the realm of like this universe. I mean, he did pretty good against some high-level guys that I wouldn't have thought that he would even stand a chance against. Like, when he fought Liam McGeary, I expected that fight to be way worse than it was. But that fight was 3 years ago now, and which is wild to think. And it has been almost 2 years since Tito has fought. But it's been way longer, Joe, since Chuck Liddell fought. How does this one go? Because quite frankly, I think if Tito takes him down, that's a wrap.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much the basics right there. Tito's not going to, unless the ego gets in the way, but I don't see him wanting to stand and trade with Chuck Liddell for too long. Just have Chuck thinking he's in a striking fight, take him down to the ground, and just control him, and try and get the finish, try and get the TKO, try and get some sort of knockout on the mat as opposed to standing up. I mean, the only reason why we're watching is because of just it's the shock value train wreck factor, right? What's going to happen between these two? It's not a viable fight for any division whatsoever. It's a spectacle. Two legends of the sport, Hall of Famers. They want to go at it, let them go at it. But I mean, the line on Tito's minus 275 plus 235 for Chuck Liddell. I'm not putting any money on Chuck Liddell. I don't
five on that at all. No. In any way.
I mean, have crazier things happened in MMA, boys? Oh yeah, big time, right? Like, what if Chuck Liddell wins this? What's he going to do? Start calling people out, right? Like,
he says he wants to fight more.
Oh man, I don't know. It guys, it is what it is. I'm hopefully going to be able to tune in to watch this. Thank you, Fight TV. But I don't know, guys. I think Tito works his takedown, boys, gets him against the cage. If he's not silly enough. I will say this about Tito in his interviews. My inclination was years and years ago, even James after the Big Bear, when the team and I went up to Big Bear for UFC Central to do that massive feature on Tito, and all the different times he kind of gave us the time of day. I just started realizing in some of the post-fight and pre-fight press conferences, the repetitive nature of his answers. I don't think he realizes that, dude, everyone's heard that many times, right? Like, they've already heard that answer many, many times. I get it. You're because he's got a bit of a PR background, right? Don't kid yourself. He does. He's got a PR background. So it is one of those things where it's like, dude, like, everybody heard that already many, many times. And I guess in his mind, it's like, get the same message out there all the time, every interview, everything. And it's just like, no, it doesn't work that way sometimes, right? So still got all the time in the world for him, though, right? He's done a lot for my career. So
now I do want to say there are a couple fights on this show that I'm legitimately interested in. Tom Lawler, who we haven't seen fight since 2016, he is a pro wrestler now, straight up. He works for MLW, independent companies all around, was fired probably when he shouldn't have been by the UFC, all things considered. Hasn't won since 2015, but I'm interested to see where he is. And I'm very interested to see him face Darren Wynn, who has an accomplished wrestling background. I think he's a 3-time All-American, like very, very good. Not a bad fight. If you're throwing a card together, you can do worse than Gleison Tibau and Efren Escudero. That sounds like a fight that would co-headline a Bellator show on a Friday night that is headlined by Darian Caldwell. But James, what do you think of the card that they've put together? They could obviously do better than what they did, but we got what we got.
It's a boxing card. I mean, this is Golden Boy Promotions, boxing at its finest in terms of you got the main event. We'll just put together a regional show after this, because this looks to me like a Conquer FC card or something like that, because all these guys are from California. I should mention Albert Morales on this card, the former UFC bantamweight who's lost 3 in a row. He's taking on James Barnes. You've got Weston Wilson, a guy who fought in Bellator as well on here. Tom Galicchio from the Ultimate Fighter is on this card as well too. So there's a couple notable names that I'll be keeping an eye out for. Dave Terrell, not the same Dave Terrell you're thinking of, not the one who fought for UFC title, the guy who fought in WEC. and it's actually Jaron Wynn. And Jaron Wynn was actually an assistant coach for Daniel Cormier on The Ultimate Fighter, and he's actually pretty talented. Everything I hear is just great things. Huge step up, taking on a really, Lawler's got 16 fights. Jaron's got 4. Can he out wrestle Lawler? I think that's the big question. I mean, Corey Anderson was able to, but I mean, we'll see if that sort of translates. And one more thing I wanted to mention quickly, Liddell, I don't know if you guys are aware, is actually training at the Body Shop with AJ McKee. Chris Honeycutt's over there as well in preparation for his fight for Bellator. So I actually interviewed Chris for another outlet, and he was telling me basically that, Chuck's got, the best training partners he could have in terms of all that stuff. He says he's, made significant improvements. I know you got to talk about a guy you're training with, but I thought that was encouraging at the least that Chuck's just not training back at the pit by himself with John Hackleman. At least he's getting, training with young bucks like AJ McKee and, Aaron Pico and those guys. So, that should be interesting ahead of this matchup. But I think the big question in the main event really is, does Chuck still have the knockout power? I'm guessing not. It's been a while. I'm sure Joe and I were at his last fight at 115 when he fought Rich Franklin. It's been a while, and that's, it's not like you take a couple of years off. 8 years or whatever, 7 years. That's a long time.
Yeah, I'm excited for that.
Actually, James, one sec. I think the power is there. It's the speed and the accuracy.
That's true. Yeah, good point.
I mean, I don't think you ever lose power, not until you're probably in your 50s, right? So, it's getting close.
Chuck's close.
Yeah, 50s and 60s, I should say. But I think the power will always be there for a guy like Chuck Liddell. What's probably not there is the speed and the accuracy, the stamina. It'd be fantastic if he can prove us all wrong, right?
Yeah, Liddell turns 49 next month. I am very excited for that Wynn and Lawler fight. I think that's about as high level as you're going to get on a card like this. And Wynn, I think it might give him an idea of where he wants to fight, because he's jumped back and forth between like catch weights and light heavyweight and all this stuff. And it's funny that he worked with Cormier, because they are very similar in stature as it relates to those divisions. So James Lynch will have you on the post show that night. I will be at Starrcade, but head over to @Fightful Online, retweet that post, and you will be eligible to win a code for that, to get that show for free, essentially. So make sure you guys check that out. We'll have coverage of Beijing. We'll have coverage of Liddell and Ortiz. But Joe, what do you got going on this week?
Same old, man. Soccer. It's going to be fun, but it's a good weekend for MMA. I'm going to enjoy these fights, despite the fact that they're not, Super Bowl MMA sort of stuff, but it's going to be fun. Fun scraps for sure.
James, what do you got going on this week?
We got a lot of stuff going on Fightful. Like we referenced there, the interview with Curtis Blades. You can check that out. We got a pros picks for Nagano and Blades. We've also got interviews with Alex Morono, Martin Day on this card as well. So check that out. Like Sean mentioned, I'll be doing the post-fight show for Liddell Ortiz as well as UFC Beijing. And we had some big interviews last week. Israel Adesanya, check that out. Valentina Shevchenko, another good interview there ahead of her title fight at UFC 231. So we're bringing you lots of good interviews there, guys. Be on the lookout. And as always, follow me on Twitter @Lynch on Sports. Thanks for being here, guys.
Guys, subscribe to the new MMA and boxing channel. Really trying to push that towards 1,000. Help you boys out. And, of course, tweet about this podcast. We are on podcast platforms everywhere. Until next time, guys, we are out.